You're listening to the Conference Board of Canada's Mental Health and COVID-19 series with Dr. Bill Howatt, Chief of Research, Workplace Productivity.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Bill Howatt. I'm Chief of Research at the Conference Board of Canada. Workforce productivity is the area I focus and play in, and mental health is where I really am passionate about and I deeply care. I spend quite a bit of time working. I have the privilege today of a really dear friend that I've had some opportunity to do some work over with. He's agreed to engage us in a 20-minute conversation. I'm pleased to introduce Andrew Harkness. He's a strategy and organizational health leader for WSPS. He's a leader in the field. He was a part of the original CSA psychological standard, part of that construction. And my experience of being involved with the CSA and the work I'm doing with them, I can tell you it's not an easy task to do this kind of stuff on top of everything else you do. And I'll be interested, Andrew, when we get into this whole thing around normative to non-normative language. Please speak in non-normative language today, and people that get this will get the joke. So I guess, Andrew, it would be kind of interesting. This is going to be a pretty informal conversation to share some ideas back and forth, and just kind of, we're kind of doing a build up to the Better Workplace virtual conference that's happening October 26th, and just to get some ideas, because the thing I'm going to be doing some talking about, you're really involved in, and a part of how I got to where I'm at in this conversation and have is, the work we've done together has influenced some of my thinking as well. So I kind of love to get your thinking. Is that so? We're sitting here in 2020, having this conversation all about, workplace mental health and all those kind of things. Before I get into a couple of questions, I want to have, do you have any reflection or thoughts on just basically how do we get to where we're at in your mind, just in the general, before we get into it, generally around the conversation around psychological health and safety? Like, where do you think we are at it? And any observations would be great. Like, what comes top to mind for you?
Well, it is a pleasure to be with you for the next couple of minutes for an interesting conversation. And just to sort of alliterate on the working relationship, we're one of the 4 health and safety associations in the province of Ontario, and we are engaging within our prevention system to want to advance those conversations in workplace mental health. And so it's been a great opportunity for us to be able to engage with you and the board to kind of work this forward. Where are we now? For one piece, WSPS has been very much involved in the healthy work conversations, going actually back and even before the days of the Better Workplace Conference. You're talking about, going back into the 2000s and that sort of aspect, and even earlier, where we were early days with some of the models that came out of Health Canada and the like to want to advance. But it was interesting that when we had worked it from that comprehensive healthy workplace concept, how challenging it was for workplaces to grasp it and be able to work with it. And sometimes I think it was because it was so comprehensive and so big, it became daunting. And we've seen, again, greater emphasis in terms of our work has been on different types of hazards, not so much the psychological ones. So if you were starting to look at, okay, the healthy workplace talks about culture, and it talks about physical health and safety, and it talks about healthy lifestyle practices and corporate social responsibility, all things that again are the nice to haves for many organizations, and they don't see it in the day-to-day stuff. And so again, if I was going to look at this from two angles and say, well, since the standard came out and we started to focus more on workplace mental health, it seemed to narrow the race boundaries a little bit more, so people can kind of say, okay, I get a sense of where we're going now with this. But I think there's another piece too, is we can't rule out that we're living in a very different time now over this past 7 months. And I think that has been a huge catalyst on bringing conversation to the front of the room. And where stigma and stuff has been constant challenges for us, you're not going to go through a newscast today. You're not going to have a conversation on the talk shows and probably within your colleagues that doesn't talk about how much of a shift the COVID conversation has had on everything to do with from daily lives to keeping our businesses open. And I think that is an opportunity. I hate to say it in terms of what it's costing us, but it's causing us to want to talk more about this and to be more open about it. A conversation with my employer to be able to say, I'm afraid to come back to work if it was in a recovery type of thing, are pieces that does, I think, suggest that paradigm is shifting.
Yeah, it's interesting, Andrew. One of the things I'm fascinated about this pandemic and the work we're doing with WSP, and we're doing some work with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And when I was had a conversation with the Mental Health Commission today, and one of the things that's the level of concern that over the next 12 weeks, folks like us in this world of mental health I'm really concerned about this fourth wave. And I'm not sure that people can actually fathom being fatigued if we don't pay some attention to this. But here's the thing that I find fascinating. All the markers are like mental health was an issue before COVID. Now we know mental health is an issue. Psychological health and safety legislation is being pushing it, as well as we know research from like Aristotle and Google work around, yes, inclusion, help creating a place for people to feel welcomed, and the productivity in the business case. Andrew, why is psychological safety harder to grasp than OHS traditional? Like, it seems that people got the idea you had to put your hard hat on every day. You had to sit down, have your meeting. You needed to focus on physical health every day. Why is it the world of mental health, Andrew? Oh, we'll send them to a resilience workshop, check the box, we'll train a couple of managers, and we're going to be good. Like, what's happening? Why are we not getting this? Has to be mainstream, like every day, not something that's done off the side of the desk. And I'd love to get your perceptions on this, because I know we talked about this lots.
We do talk about it a lot, and I think that there's a number of different factors, I think, that come into play here. One of them being, when we've approached, you hear people talk about safety being common sense, and really reflect on that. And to be honest, yes, it can be, but safety is also about discipline and planning and managing. And what we've tended to look at over the years is the human being, the human animal, we're not good at planning. We don't think proactively. We live life in the moment, and we tend to be situational or reactive. And so, in the battles of just even the physical health and safety stuff, it's always been a challenge to say, like, how do you make it real so that people can see what that risk and threat is, without getting into the context of, am I taking safety to the level where it almost becomes ridiculous? We lose the connection to the actual risk. Yeah. And so, we talk about things like, okay, slipping and falling in a parking lot. I get it. There's a potential for physical injury with that. But we also want to look at saying, is that where the highest risks are going to be, and making sure we pay attention to those. And we've traditionally controlled safety from the point of view of personal protective equipment. We put the hard hat on, it's visible, it's easy to do, it's relatively low cost. All those sort of things have been the components. So here's on the one side, I think it's not so much human nature to really think safety anymore. We have a relatively safe living space, and so it's kind of hard that way. The second piece that comes to mind is thinking about, generally, if we look at legislation, we spent about 150 years in health and safety legislation in this country that has looked at physical incident and cause only, the physical conditions of the workplace. That has been the primary focus of all of the legislation. And generally, it's the acute. It's that event that takes place, the fall from heights, the amputations, the fatality. And even when we want to talk about those aspects of the chronic type of injury, that's been a challenge for health and safety. We're going through concerns now with mental health. 20 years ago, this was the same conversation with stigma attached around things like the musculoskeletal injuries.
Okay.
Right? The health and safety guys are looking at that, and gals, and they're going, okay, so we had an incident. Tell me the date of incident. And of course, illness and disease doesn't lend itself well to that. And so the chronic pieces. So you've changed what people are now living with and seeing. The legislation, even today, doesn't have much about ergonomics and musculoskeletal. It's still going to be the physicals. When we talk about inspections, what do you inspect for? We're so used to the physical condition. The inspectorate in our province to come back and say, okay, how do I inspect for psychological health and safety? That becomes an aspect of, wow, I can't see it, touch, taste, or feel it. So How am I going to actually address that as I get into, that workplace scenario? So our regulators are struggling with what does that actually look like and mean? For us, I guess, the third piece that I would sort of look to is when we have this conversation, we need to be clear on language. And I believe that when we have this conversation about mental health, people tend to see that in the context of the clinical mental illness paradigm.
100%.
Right? And when we do that, the health and safety people and folks are looking at it and they say, well, what's that got to do with health and safety? You're talking about people's depression and anxiety and other things. And I think, yes, we do want to have an awareness, and there's the stigma that goes with that. But here's where the language can really work to our favor. What we're doing in this context and with our roadmap and our work going forward is we want to think about mental harm prevention. We want to think about psychological injury and psychological harm prevention, because now that language aligns quite nicely to what you and I have already been doing for 150 years, and that is, how are you preventing physical injury and physical harm? And I think when you make that click, people can kind of get the perspective now of, all right, you're talking about what's going on in my workplace now. And those are things that, in terms of how we organize our work and how we manage our people, they're the things that we are doing already today. So these are exercises and activities that we're involved with, and therefore we have a lot of control over. But we also need to look at, are we looking at those activities in such a way that mindfulness and carefulness, awareness, aspects of emotional intelligence and leadership behaviors, all of those sort of pieces become that much more relevant for us as we further the conversation. But I do think it's, when you can talk to me about harm prevention, I can see the context to the health and safety piece much more clearly.
Yeah, I agree. I think, when you cut through it, Andrew, one of the things I'm fascinated, I think with the physical, I can see something really, really simple, meaning not that it's simple in the regards, but if someone sticks their hand in a machine and your brain can say, yes, I can see how that can lose my hand, versus a workplace factor of work demand could actually have an accumulative impact on my experience, could impact me, result in psychosocial hazards that result in fatigue, for example, that could result in distraction, that I might get in a car accident on my way home, fall down a set of stairs. I think some people are not equating the mind-body tolerance. So with all that being said, I think one of the parts I'd love to spend, the next 8 to 10 minutes on is really getting into it. So what is WSPS doing? I know we're doing some work with the conference board. We're publishing a piece, but it's your piece of work. So let's speak from it through the lens that this is your body of work. How is your organization focusing on trying to make this conversation around psychological just a little bit easier to get into and know how to pick my spot to start beginnings? Maybe you might want to share the work you're thinking about.
I would, because I'm excited about this as well. In our particular province, our prevention system reports into the chief prevention officer within our ministry for labor and skills and training development. And I think it's been through some of their thought leadership that has asked and wanted to rethink a little bit about how we bring services and solutions to our customers. And so one of the things that the chief prevention officer has promoted is that mental health is one of the key strategy pillars for the ministry. And therefore, how do we continue to advance that? And looking at this project that they have asked WSPS to lead was to look at our system and how we provide services and support to our workplaces, and how can we build capacity and confidence and competencies in deliver these services. And so one of the things that brought you and I together, of course, was we've engaged, since the standard came out, a lot of organizations in the area of psychological health and safety strategies and or implementing the national standard. And when it first came out, and the CSA group and we're promoting this existence now, I think we all had this feeling of, but this thing is going to change the world. It's fantastic. But what we've also found with organizations trying to work through it is it's got some difficulties associated with it. One, most organizations do not engage in best practices per se of what the standards can be. So sometimes that's a bit of a foreign world for folks. And as you mentioned, normative language and the design of a standard and some of its limitations can be a little bit off-putting and appear to be bureaucracy. And so what we wanted to do with this project was to be able to look at saying, can we find a better way for us to support organizations implementing a psychological health and safety strategy? And as you know, we put that into an analogy of being on a journey, and therefore a journey map or a roadmap to how can we implement the national standard or its principles became part of the research that your folks have been doing in terms of, can we find evidence that reflects the different aspects of programming and employee experiences that do work in this area, but also convey that into a building blocks type of approach in the roadmap, where organizations would be having the freedom to know what their destination is going to be. What I mean by that is they understand what their strategy is. And that strategy may be, in my world right now, I need to raise awareness. I need to talk about aspects of stigma reduction and the like. Whereas others may say, I'm very much interested in going down the path of implementing the national standard. So we wanted our roadmap and concept to have that sort of scalability and flexibility. The 8 building blocks that we've now come up with basically represent destinations and journey points of the different resources, tools, templates, and tips that we would then start to work with to support an organization that was trying to build its system. And we're doing it in a way that's not sort of the standard, here's what the sections of the standard now call for, and we build it accordingly. We are building it more on terms of what makes sense. So for example, if you were going to adopt a new strategy, psychological health and safety, if I boil that down, it's about change. And so if you're going to introduce change into an organization, even with all the good things we want this to do, change can also be stressful. And so we put right up front in our roadmap conversations the need to have support systems thought about as you're now bringing people forward into the change pieces. So we wanted people to see that, we talk about, and you can imagine what goes into them when we talk about foundations and we talk about planning and support. And then we want people to take a look at things like their organizational culture and its influences, looking at prevention strategies, how do they fit in? And we have a section on what we call social connections, which being one of the most interesting parts that our friendship has sort of generated, Bill, was seeing the evidence that talks to us about the impact social connections have on our mental health is to me, it's a real good tagline. It's a good way for us to be able to talk to people about the bridges we're trying to create, and being able to look at saying, if social connections have this mental health influence, what can we be doing to reinforce that? Because that's very much at the worker level, that's at the individual level, and it can have that direct impact. But there's ways that we can be looking at social connections in the more aggregate and in the more organizational perspective as well. But what are we doing? We're continuing to promote that roadmap and see those resources align. We're in the process of making sure that gets accessible through some case studies over this next year, and then its availability to our organizations across the province, across the country, would have access to be able to use these tools as we go forward. It also gives us the opportunity to recognize we don't have all the answers, we don't have all the resources, but we certainly do have some good friendships with the Commission, the board of the Conference Board of Canada, and others that can help us shepherd and marshal the different resources that would make it that much easier for companies, organizations to adopt a psychological health and safety strategy.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I mean, coming out very shortly will be the first green paper that will kind of give, hey, this is what the first line, what our thinking is, where we're at. And then we're also going to be coming up through the CEO network fairly shortly. I think we're going to have I think we're calling kind of a quick start guide, just to get these concepts out so people can see it. And then stay tuned, because there'll be some big announcements from WSPS for how people can get involved. There'll be an opportunity to be doing some invitations and those kind of things. So continue to check out what WSPS is doing. One of the things I'll say to you, Andrew, that I'm finding super, super fascinating about this is the opportunity to actually start to build an evidence base. Like, in other words, I believe there's really good intentions around programs and policies, but I think where you and I become very akin, very much like OHS, this is a behavioral based business. And what are the things that are creating hazards? So in other words, factors are things creating the stress. The byproduct are these things called hazards. So what are the levers employers can actually pull that can help, but keeping in mind that every employee owns their mental health. So the challenge of reducing mental harms and promoting mental health requires a two-way accountability. And a part of its education, a part of its commitment, and a part of its passion. Curious, before we kind of wrap up, Andrew, and do our wind down, what would you say when you're looking at the roadmap? What's the thing you're the most excited about that you're hoping to find over the next couple of years during your discovery process?
I think as we discover more of these, what do you call the action research or evidence-based, but where we have that, I'm excited about having more confidence in what we're recommending and directing our customers to explore. I've been around for a little while in this business, over 32 years as a field consultant, and I got to tell you that a lot of what I was taught and trained on in order to provide support to our customers was anecdotal based. It was really about, the experiences of others, and here's what we think we should be doing, but very little evidence or even thought to evidence to say, can you prove this? And I think as well, a lot of our health and safety activity has come up through legislation. And again, physical issues, put a guard against the machine, all that sort of piece. And so if you looked at a lot of people's genesis of where their health and safety programs have come from, it's been mainly anecdotal type of backgrounds. Hey, it worked at my company, so it should work now at this new company, or it's legislatively driven. And what I'm excited about is with our roadmaps and with programs like standards, they talk to you about a non-prescriptive approach. What can we be doing? Because that's what our need is. So when I identify what my issues are and I have a risk assessment or needs assessments, that really, that's what drives my program going forward. And I think as we start to apply it into this context, and people can see that there's a flexibility and there's a scalability and there are timetables that are really up to what the workplace wants to be able to do, not stuff that's being dictated against them. And the part that I think you've brought to us that we've really wanted to rethink is this whole concept of the employee experience. Thinking about it that way, and especially with saying, okay, if we offer these types of resources and our people are taking advantage of them, are we also seeing whether or not they're actually making that difference for them? And to me, that's been another part I'm really going to be intrigued to see what this looks like as we move forward.
Yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up, Andrew. I'm so grateful for your thinking. Final thought I'll add to that I think a lot of leaders miss the boat on is that just because they're doing things does not mean that the employees are actually receiving it the way they think they're doing it. Just checking the box doesn't work. I mean, trust comes from a byproduct of honesty, that I believe what you say happens. And integrity, you do what you say consistently when you're not being watched. We have too many leaders who are behaving when they're being watched, and they may not be paying attention. And what happens is every time we say something to an employee that's disrespectful or hard, it's kind of like a nail in a board. Like you pull the nail out, the hole's still there. And that whole psychological safety about feeling welcome. So first of all, I have to really make sure from my heart, I tell you how grateful I have been for our relationship, our partnership. Your team is simply incredible. Sandra, Lynn, all of you guys are a class shop. And what I like about is the humility that you bring, the openness to want to partner and actually not trying to be the sage in the stage. So for that, Andrew, I'm super, super grateful. I'm excited about our journey. I like the fact that you don't always agree with me, which is fun. And I love that part about you. I love the intellectualness we have with this. I wanted to say to everybody, thank you. If you want to know more about what Andrew is doing, you can find him very quickly. We'll make sure that we have an email so you can link and hear about his good work. We'll have the links in they'll be in the documents that are coming out. Stay tuned. The conference board will be doing some promotion on our upcoming introduction to the roadmap. So with that, everybody, I'd like to thank you very, very much. I really enjoy these types of conversations. We need to do this more. I'd like to be able to invite all of you to our upcoming Better Workplace Conference on October 26th. I will be personally speaking on a concept that's aligned to the roadmap around social connection. I'll be talking a little around isolation, loneliness. We really believe that every employee needs to have at least one person in the workplace they feel psychologically safe. And we got to stop in this virtual world to assume that people are having these meaningful, authentic connections that are meaningful for both ways. So anyways, with that, I'm so grateful. Andrew, I'm going to give you the final word and before we say goodbye.
Thanks, Colin. I do appreciate the kind words, and we reciprocate accordingly. And I'm just going to say the same thing. You know what? We're going to see you at the conference. This is one of our mainstay conferences in the calendar year. So for those of you who may be visiting it for the first time, you are going to be suitably impressed. It is an excellent way for us to network and also see, what else is coming down the pipe and innovative in these areas. So enjoy the conference. I know you're going to have a great experience.
I appreciate it. Not even in our script, you're awesome, man. So thank you very much. So we're all going to sign off now. Wish you all the best. See you at the conference. Take care. Thank you, Andrew. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye now.
Hi, Bill Howatt here. Hopefully you're finding these videos of some value. If you'd like to share these, on the lower right of your video, there's a icon you can click. You can send it through your social media feeds, join the Conference Board of Canada social media feed so we can keep you up to date. And if you have ideas, suggestions, please leave your comment so we can consider them. And if you have things that you'd like us to speak to, I certainly will try to do all I can to help out. With that, have a wonderful day.